So, as you guys know, I'm finishing up my specialist degree, and part of that, we were asked to do a project, and so I opted to do professional development. And the whole time I've been in school, I feel like I'm always, and maybe you guys are like this too, when you take a class or you do a training, I'm always trying to pull the things that I think are most applicable to my own classroom and in my own teaching. And I think because of the population that we work with is so specialized that unfortunately not all the trainings apply to us. So try to hone in on some things that I thought we could use down here in our classrooms. And I feel like there's a big push right now for everything to be evidence-based. So I thought I would incorporate that too. So basically, what is an evidence-based strategy or practice? It means that there's been rigorous research behind it. So it's not that it's just research, but it means that it's basically been proven with a set of students. And it has to be documented then multiple times for them to say that it's research-based. All right. So, and again, I feel like in recent years, there's been a big push to use evidence-based practices and strategies. And one of the reasons why is because in 2004, IDEA was amended, and it was because there was a huge segment of the population that was going into special education, but it was because they were not being tested correctly, or they weren't even having evidence-based curriculum to show that they were in need of services, essentially. So when they went back and they, I guess, would look at the data, they would realize that the curriculum choices that the teachers were using weren't authentic and weren't proven, and so that's why they were just being mislabeled. So now there's a big push, and it actually says in the legislation that it should be scientifically based instructional practices. So, and another good reason I think for us, why I thought this would be meaningful, is because our evaluation through TEKS, as you guys know, Performance Standard 3, talks about having research-based instructional strategies, which I thought was kind of interesting because research, again, just means that it's been researched. It doesn't technically mean that it's been evidence, but obviously if you're using evidence-based strategies, then that would be best practice even over it being research. So, and I know I've sent you guys, I mean, I know you guys have all seen this, but I tried to, if I send you guys something that I think would be useful in your class, I normally will send you your TEKS standard attached to it so that you can say and document that you're using these type of strategies in the classroom. And so these are the ones that I decided today that we would talk about. Probably some of them look a little familiar because we're all using some of these in some aspect or another in our classroom, but a few of them I just wanted to expand on them. And then hopefully there's a few that maybe you haven't heard of, like concrete to representational to abstract. But I think we've all heard of the task analysis, so I'm just gonna go into depth a little bit about it. And then we've definitely heard of prompting systems, and so we'll review that. And I'm sure everybody in here uses reinforcement, but we'll talk about it more specifically. So direct instruction, I feel like it's another one of those, and maybe it's just because I've been in school lately, but I feel like in recent years, direct instruction seems to be kind of like a buzzword. It is a strategy that's been around for a really long time. You might also hear it called explicit instruction, and it's really similar to the philosophy of I do, we do, you do. So I think it started in the 60s, and the great thing about DI, this is what they call it, is that it's also effective with every level of students. So it's not just with special ed students, it's effective with your general ed students, and it's effective with every cognitive level. So And it can also be then generalized, not just in your academic settings, but in your daily living and in your vocational settings. So I think it's a cool, really basic teaching strategy for us even. If you research it, there's always stages or steps to it. Sometimes they might be called something a little differently, but basically there's an orientation stage, and that's where you're gonna review what you have been doing, you're gonna state what the objective of the lesson is, then you're gonna have your presentation, so that is more of the I'm doing it as a teacher, and then you're gonna model it, so you are going to model it with the students, then they're gonna do a guided practice. So a guided practice would probably be if, you know, you're doing the work, if they're doing the work at their seats and you're walking around and you're giving feedback as necessary. And then independent practice would obviously be when they are doing it by themselves. So I found a really quick video of it before I put it on. The reason why I like the video is because A, it's very short. I think it was probably a student who videotaped herself with her daughter, but she's doing a really basic skill, so I think it's easy for us to see the steps because it would be more applicable to the students that we serve. So, and see if you guys can see some of those steps that we talked about when it's going. Well, what's that?
Minimize that.
Thank you. I think that mine's gonna be on.
Can't guarantee that. Is the aux cord in?
It's on, it's just quiet.
Alright, one more time. It was a quick video, but now it might be a little longer. Ready?
Just hit from.
Just like, again, I'll take me back.
Yeah. You'll have to scroll through.
So, anyway, could you guys see some of those steps that we talked about? When she sets the materials up and she says, you remember, we were working on counting, and she kind of goes through the procedures too. She talks about her rules of, those cues, having a quiet mouth and listening, and then she presents. You can see her modeling because she does it with her. It's kind of hard to probably see the independent practice because I think typically when they talk about DI, independent is really independent. She said, okay, you can do it, but she almost like wanted to engage, you could see. So I couldn't see this phase super clear, but I could definitely see the guided practice and the modeling with her too. So the next one I'm going to talk about was concrete to representational to abstract, which is also called CRA. So obviously C stands for concrete, and that means you're learning by using hands-on concrete materials or manipulatives. R stands for representational, so you're learning through the use of picture representations. And A for abstract, so you're learning through the use of abstract notation. So this is a strategy that's really good to use in math. When I first learned about it though, my mind kept going towards teaching vocabulary because I think of our low-level learners, and I think concrete would be the actual object, representational would be like a picture symbol, and then abstract would be the word. I couldn't find any research that's been done in teaching, or at least it being evidence-based in teaching vocabulary, but it's super good. I say super good, but it's very effective in teaching math, and there's a lot of data behind it. And again, it's one of those strategies that can be used with all levels of students. So here's some examples that I pulled from the internet. If you are teaching kids how to add, like this would be your concrete, right? With the blocks, representational would be drawing, and then abstract would be the actual numbers. I think the great thing about it, and they talked about this, it's a multimodal form of learning, meaning that you're using different senses. You're also being able to generalize it. Obviously, if you can get it here and get it there, you're generalizing it from the stages. I didn't read a ton about differentiating, but I feel like for our kids, like there's gonna be kids that probably can only do this part, and then they might be able to move up, but they might stay here. So it's a cool strategy that you can use with all your kids. Obviously the goal would be to get to abstract, but some of our guys just might stay at those different levels, but it's okay because then you can be on the same lesson with everybody and just be differentiating. I also wanted to cover it because I know like in Kaylee's class, I've seen her do pieces of this. I don't know if she's always done it in such a linear fashion, but she's definitely done pieces of it, and so it might be cool because then you might start thinking of how can I do it, like moving from C to A. But also you can document that you're using this strategy in your TEKS. So. All right, so we've all heard of a task analysis. And basically it's breaking a scale into smaller parts that are more manageable. And then as the learner learns those steps, they become increasingly more independent and they're able to perform the larger skill at the end. So lots of research out there for using a task analysis with our kids. It's especially good, I want to say, with our ASD students. It can be used, again, it's one of those strategies that can be used to teach academics, but it can also be used for vocational skills, communication skills, daily living, and self-help. It can be presented in written words, and picture symbols, and video modeling, which is actually a strategy within the strategy. so, and it's funny because I read so much about video modeling. I've never actually done it in any of my classes. And I think it's such a cool thing because now we all have cell phones, so we could easily do it. And I thought of like the other day when we made the task analysis for the laundry, and I was like, oh, wouldn't be that would be cool if we also did like a video of it, and broke it down. So it's a good strategy, obviously, to use if you have to teach multi-steps, and if a student, if you're trying to teach a sequence and they keep getting stuck on stuff in particular. All right, so a little bit more about it. Obviously, before you're going to do a task analysis, the best thing to do is write down all the steps that are associated. And it might be beneficial to watch somebody else do it so that you don't miss the steps, because sometimes you might leave one out accidentally. You always want to make sure that you're taking data beforehand so that you know if there's any prerequisite skills. So like if you're trying to teach a student how to write their name, but they don't know how to hold the pencil, stuff like that. And then when we talk about task analysis, there's basically 3 ways to do it. There is forward chaining, there's backwards chaining, and there's total task presentation. So with forward changing, if we think about our student that's working on the laundry right now, if the first step, let's say we want student X to get to be able to put the soap into the washing machine. That's not the end step, but that's where we're thinking our goal is to teaching her. So this would be forward chain. So we are going to teach her to get up to that point, and maybe she doesn't get up to that point in one day. So maybe we only teach her one step basically at a time. So we're going to keep teaching that step until she gets it right before we go to the next step. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then keep adding on it until you get to the end of the sequence. So backward changing, I used to have a really hard time understanding this one initially when I heard it. So I was like, what? That doesn't make sense. But if you think about when you're teaching somebody to get dressed and you want them to be independent, you're obviously doing physical assistance to get their shirt on, right? Whatever it is. If you're putting a shirt on, it's a perfect example. So at the very end, you might reinforce if they're able just to pull it over their head, or if they're just able to pull it down. So I think of like teaching Sammy, my daughter at home right now, like, oh, great job helping me put your shirt on. Obviously, she's not doing the part where her hands are going through. I'm doing all of that. But if she even pulls it down, like that is, getting closer to the end result of being able to put her own shirt on. So backward changing would be that you are teaching the skills and then you're fading out that assistance as they're getting closer towards the end of the sequence, as their mastery towards the end of the sequence. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then total task presentation would be if you were teaching it so that they are required to do the whole task, which ironically enough is how I think most people teach task analysis. I don't know if it's really the most effective because you're reinforcing along the way until they get to the end result, but it's not breaking it up into pieces as much. So obviously I was explaining that you can use it basically across curriculum. You could use it for your higher level students. This was an example that I took from a website that had math. If you were adding 2-digit numbers, breaking down the steps of adding numbers, and that's obviously going to be with our population, it's going to be with our higher, functioning students. And then you can also supplement it supplement it with picture symbols. So, do you guys think of any other examples where you might use a task analysis to teach specific skills?
Credit card in the community.
Oh, credit card in the community, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a cool thing to actually video model,
Mhm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's kind of in that moment, in the community, it's hard to like break down those skills, you know? and
Or an
slow it
activity
down.
at job site, a specific
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
activity at a job site, I mean,
yeah. So. All right, so prompting. So least intrusive prompts are basically you are starting with the least intrusive prompts, providing that student with that to complete a given task. There are two different ways to look at prompting. There's least to most, there's most to least. So in the literature that I've been reading recently, least to most had more documented research for our guys than most to least. So most to least is also an effective strategy, but I could find more studies about least to most. So there's lots of different types of prompting. And this is probably review, you guys probably know all of these. There's gestural, so if you're pointing at something, if you position your body, if you're nodding, that would be gestural. There's visual, so using picture symbols as a reminder, maybe on somebody's desk or photograph. Physical prompts, you have full physical prompts, you have partial, which might be like a tap on the elbow or a tap on your shoulder, and then you have hand over hand. Verbal is kind of tricky too, because you also have verbal prompts that can be partial, full, or indirect. So a full would be like if you're trying to have a student repeat exactly what you're saying, you know, say, can I have this please, you know, or say cookie, versus a partial would be like cook. And then modeling is when you're showing the student the skill you want them to perform.
so that's least to most, right?
These
Model.
are not in order.
Oh, they're not.
So, the thing with this too, is I feel like prompt hierarchies seem to be kind of all over the place. When I first started teaching special ed, always, at least to most, was verbal. Verbal was always the least intrusive, they would say. But over the last 15 years, I feel like it's changed. A lot of times you see verbal, like this one, in the middle. Because I have heard at numerous trainings that verbal is the hardest one to fade out, which makes sense. You can't fade your voice out. You know, you can fade out your proximity, you can fade out that picture symbol being there, but your voice to fade out is kind of difficult. So, I wanted to give you guys an idea of what the prompt hierarchy kind of looks like, and I think I sent one of these to you guys before. But basically, independent is always going to be at the top, right? And then all the way at the bottom is going to be your full physical assistance. I like this one because I feel like some of these are, you know, it is kind of hard to say exactly where they lay, you know what I mean? And given the fact that I have studied and heard so many different things as to what is more invasive or intrusive than something else, I think this one's good that it kind of grouped them like this. I think that the verbal one should kind of lay in the middle, because I find that a lot of our ASD kids are so prompt dependent, and I think that they're verbally prompt dependent. They will just stand there and wait for you to tell them what to do. So, I mean, I'm sure, I know we've had a ton of students like this in our program. All right, so a social narrative, they're also called social stories. They are also super effective. They are more effective, I think, in general with our ASD kids. They are a way to deliver social instruction. They're typically very short in length, and they're written from the perspective of the student. So it's a lot of, I will do this, I will do that. When you're writing a social story or a narrative, they want to be at the student's reading level with appropriate grade level vocabulary. You can include pictures and visuals. I think typically most of them will have either pictures of some type or another, whether that's a picture, symbol, or a photograph, depending on the need of the student. They should be individualized to meet the needs of the intended reader. So they're typically the teacher has made that for that student, although you can find some that are kind of generic on websites that you can use. And again, they are especially beneficial for our ASD students. So, and it was in the moderate level of, I guess, of it being an effective strategy. So this website, Carol Bray, I think Carol Bray kind of coined social stories, which is more, I feel like, lingo I've always heard and I heard them referred to throughout the years versus narrative. And so this one, I thought because we were talking about the other day, we were talking about Exceptional Children's Week coming up and diagnosis of autism. All right, Kaylee, I need your help again. Thank you. So, again, you can see that this one's written in first person. Obviously, this is not, I don't want to say it's not individualized, but, you know, it's not as individualized as it could be. But I wanted you guys to look at this one just because we just talked about what it means to have a diagnosis of autism and what that means to our students. So I thought it was kind of a cool one. That's why I attached it. The reference. So that was one example. What is it that I'm doing incorrectly?
You have to like exit out of it. I don't think, is there another trick maybe?
Oh, we'll text out of this and minimize it.
No, don't think so.
I don't know if you just drag that over on top of the PowerPoint, is that what? So I was trying to-
Yeah, it's popping up on top of it anyways, but
So here's another one. It's about safety. It might be the audience. She has a few different examples on her website. Again, I think she's kind of coined that social stories name, and she has trainings and stuff that she offers. So. Yeah, look at that. So I will send this to you so you guys have these links so you can kind of check them out if you want to. And then I found this and I thought it was really good because they give you tips on how to write it. So identify the target, behavior skill, and in the title, use pictures to support the text. Again, that could be photographs, it could be picture symbols, breaking it down. Break down the event or things into simple steps, be descriptive, describe exactly what the child should do, write it in first person, which is again consistently, like throughout the literature, talking about that. Keep it simple, exact phrases. Oh, this is another one, keep the language simple and positive. So, so can you guys think of anybody in your classroom that might benefit from a social story?
Yes.
I think of a student.
I actually thought of your class
Yes.
when I was writing that
Definitely,
question.
definitely.
So maybe using the restroom and not being in there for a long time, or,
Restroom, and
I
just,
think just about anybody can use this in the story.
yeah. So, one
I
of the
like the autism
cool
one
things
too,
about
for-
them is, I don't know if I got to the slide or if I don't know if I touched on this, is that, the cool thing is that you can embed them into the classroom, and they're really quick and fast. And knowing that that's an evidence-based strategy that you're using, like you take 2 minutes at the beginning of the day, and you review that story that's particular to that student. And I think it's repetitive, it's visual. So, if we have more visual learners, it's really easy. So it's not a huge, long, time-consuming thing to do and implement in your classroom. So, and then the last one I wanted to talk about was reinforcement, because I feel like we all use reinforcement, but there's lots of different types of reinforcement, so I kind of wanted to give you guys some information on that. A lot of times when we say reinforcement, we just think of positive praise, and it's not just positive praise, it's a whole lot more. So, it's an evidence-based behavior management tool that increases the likelihood of a certain target behavior. And it works best if it's delivered immediately after the skill or behavior that you're looking for. So, a couple different types of reinforcement include positive reinforcement, which is presented immediately afterwards. It can be primary or secondary. Token economy systems, which is similar to what I think most of you guys have in your classroom, where they're earning points or tokens that are acting essentially as money, and then eventually exchanging those for something of value. And then negative reinforcement, which is the removal of an activity that a student deems as adversive. So this one was always kind of tricky for me to understand. But basically, that's okay. Basically, if you think about, let's see, if you think about a student and they're doing a great job attending to their work, and you're like, oh, you are doing a great job, Sam, on your work, and because you've done such a good job today focusing, I'm gonna eliminate 5 questions on your homework. So you're reinforcing the positive behavior, but now you've removed something that they don't like to do. Or you listened and followed directions so nicely during PE that, you do not have to do whatever at the end of the period, a mile, which wouldn't happen, but something like that. So, which is funny because I think we probably do these things, but you don't always know the names of them, of what you're doing, so it's kind of good to review. Okay, so it's rarely used alone, and it's embedded in almost every teaching strategy there is. So, for instance, if you're teaching with a task analysis, you're gonna be reinforcing along the way, right? Whether that's with something that's tangible, or with verbal praise, or with a high five, right? So it's strongly related to all of these evidence-based strategies. So, and it's effective across all ages and all grade levels. It's most effective when it's individualized for the student, so that's where your reinforcement inventory, remember at the beginning of the year, I sent you guys all those inventories to take home and have your parents hopefully fill out. So if the student's able to tell you, that's probably even better than the student or the parent providing the information, but then you know like what it is that the student wants to try to earn. It's important when you're using reinforcement that you avoid satiation. So basically, you don't want to, if you're teaching a task and you don't want to continue to praise per se if they've got that stuff down. And you don't want to just keep giving reinforcement if you're overdoing it, obviously it's not gonna be meaningful. So, and of course, as skills and behaviors are learned, then the reinforcement should be faded out. So here is a table with kind of schedules and descriptions of the different type of schedules. So intermittent basically means that it's not continuous, that you're giving reinforcement at different times. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. There's a variable ratio, which means that you're providing it after an unpredictable amount of correct responses. So of these four, this one I think yields the highest rate of behaviors, of positive behaviors of that whatever that goal is. And so that would be like if you're giving verbal responses after an unpredictable number of correct responses. So like after the third time, after the sixth time, after the 10th time, like whatever, randomly you're doing, you're throwing it out. It's also like somebody who likes to gamble. So if you think of it that way, right? They don't know when they're doing like a slot machine, when they put their coin in, whether or not they're gonna be rewarded or not. So then they're gonna continue doing that because it's so unpredictable. Fixed ratio is reinforcement. It's provided after a predictable number of correct responses. So that means like you basically have predetermined when you're going to give the reinforcement, reward, whatever it is. So an example would be if you were giving an edible after a certain number of predetermined correct responses. So I'm gonna give them reinforcement after the second, and then after the fourth, and then after the sixth. So, and another way to think of it, kind of, it's not in the teaching world, but because reinforcement obviously exists in every part of our lives. Like it's not just in the teaching aspect too. Like we are all reinforced human beings. So if you think of somebody who is an artist who doesn't get paid every time they complete a piece of artwork, but maybe they get paid after they've completed 2 of them. And then variable interval would be when reinforcement is provided after variable time periods. So an example would be given a tangible item after an unpredictable time period, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So the intervals, I just think of time is how I kind of see it. It's very time-based. So this is unpredictable again. And then fixed interval would be that you are doing it on a time schedule. So every 5 minutes, which I know in your classroom, Zach, you had to do, every 5 minutes you are going to receive this. The timer's gonna go off, and if you're on task after 5 minutes, then you're gonna receive it. After 10 minutes, you're gonna receive it again. So I went ahead and I put this slide on here because I wanted to give you a couple more resources in case you guys wanted to look any of this stuff or you wanted any more information. So I included another really quick video on DI if you wanted to watch it. Again, it's very quick because I know your time is valuable. So, and then these are this is the one social narrative, social story site. It was the Carol Gray, who I told you kind of coined that. And then this one also had some, again, I think it's probably more meaningful if you make them specifically for the student, but if you're not super creative and that's kind of hard for you, then you might find something that's useful. And then this was a video I watched, and it was pretty good because it went through the different prompts. Again, it was like maybe 2 minutes long, but if you're like questioning exactly what the prompt hierarchy looks like, it was good. I gave the link again for the reinforcement inventories in case you need it again or wanted to try to send it home. But you can always have your students, some of the students actually fill them out. And then this side I wanted to include down here. So the Iris Center is through Vanderbilt University. And in a lot of my classes, we've had to watch different pieces of these modules they have. They have a ton of online professional development. And the cool thing is that this year, they're offering these free professional development certificates. So I think, you have to check, I guess, with the state that you live in, obviously, whether there's reciprocity with the units and stuff. But even, if you chose to just learn something about a topic on your own and you're not worried about getting the professional development CUs or whatever it is, This is a great website and a great resource. So, and they have a whole section on just evidence-based research strategies. And the whole website is basically geared towards special ed. So, there's a ton of information on it. So I wanted to include that. And then my last page is just my references in case you guys wanted any other references.
Thanks, Catherine.
Yes, very good.